Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for picking this podcast. There is like 2 million podcasts that you can choose from, and yet here you are listening to us today because this is the show that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. All right, my name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. But about once a month, I host without Craig. We do a career development episode. And I miss those. I miss Craig when we do these episodes without Craig, but we must go forward. Today, we are going to talk about emotional intelligence and self-mastery, along with the idea of psychological safety. And our guest today is Robert Grossman. He is the owner of Black Diamond Leadership, and he works with leaders and teams to create high-level engagement and performance. What he does is he coaches and he trains, and he has high-impact workshops that he presents for companies so that everybody can thrive. Hey, Robert, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Awesome, Tom. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and I am thrilled to be here today.
I'm glad to have you here. Now, before we get started, your company is called Black Diamond Leadership. I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess you named it that because you must be an avid skier. Is that true?
It is true, Tom. I started skiing when I was 6 years old at Mammoth Mountain, California, and I still ski today at 59 years old. And I called it Black Diamond for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is the passion of skiing. I spent 15 years on a ski patrol, for example, leading that patrol. And, and half-heartedly, the actual truth is when I was starting this company, Black Diamond Leadership was available as a URL. So I grabbed it as well. But it all fit together perfectly.
Nice. So Mammoth Mountain is one of the favorite places in the world for my daughter and my future son-in-law. He grew up in Southern California, skiing Mammoth 5 or 6 times a year. And they were supposed to get married at Mammoth in 2020. But you might have noticed that late spring 2020, ski resorts all closed down along with everything else. So that wedding never happened on the ski slopes. But I love every time someone says Mammoth, I'm like, oh, we were supposed to be at Mammoth.
Well, here's my question. Was your daughter going to wear her wedding dress at the top of Mammoth and ski down in her wedding dress?
That's exactly what the plan was. They were going to get married. They were going to get married at the top of the mountain, and she bought a dress that could be bustled. So, I mean, she wasn't going to ski like moguls and stuff, but she was going to be able to ski down that final run down to the lodge. But alas, that didn't happen. And eventually they'll get married, but they're going to get married at a hotel in San Diego right on the water. So they sort of changed it up for what is actually going to be round 3. But the audience isn't here to hear about my family wedding plans. The audience is here to learn about self-mastery, emotional intelligence, and psychological safety. So let's start with emotional intelligence and self-mastery. What is that and what does it mean and why is it even important?
Well, emotional intelligence, when you really boil it down, it's understanding and recognizing that as human beings, we are emotionally driven. In fact, we experience life emotionally first. The challenge with that is that also engages the fight or flight mechanism. And so when we're confronted by something that is challenging, we either want to fight or we want to flee that situation. So emotional intelligence is recognizing that and learning how to engage our rational brain to make sense of what is actually going on, not what we are imagining that's going on.
So why is this important to people to be able to recognize the difference between what they're imagining and what's real? Why does this matter and why does it impact people in the workforce?
Well, it goes beyond the workforce as well, right? It improves family relationships. It improves relationships with significant others and your friends, and even how you interact with people in the world. But why is it important? Because in business especially, We deal with things all the time. Things are coming at us from right and left. I'll give you an example, actually. I was working with a team of executives at a software company in Southern California, and we were starting the process of talking about emotional intelligence. And one of the leaders stood up and said, "I don't need this. I got this handled." And I said, "Really? Great. Tell us why." And he began to talk about a demo that their company was going to do that required a lot of computers, and he was in charge of it. And we walked in to see how things were being set up. He noticed all of the plugs of these computers were plugged into the same circuit, and that was really dangerous, right? Because it could have blown the circuit. So proudly, he said, "I withheld my temper, and I told them calmly that they need to, find different circuits." I said, "Great. Then what happened?" Well, I went back to my office. "Okay, great. How was your afternoon?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, were you effective or were you stewing about what happened?" He goes, "Oh yeah, I was stewing all right. I was really mad and I got nothing done the rest of the afternoon." I said, "Wonderful. So you controlled your outburst, but you weren't effective the rest of the day." So, so that's one example. But to really kind of bring it around and sum it up, when we're emotionally charged in a situation, we are not seeing what is really going on. We engage in distortions of reality or our reasoning. For example, black and white thinking, where we no longer see options. It's either this or that. A big one is catastrophizing, like it's the worst thing ever. And also mind reading or fortune telling. When we engage in these distortions of our reasoning, we're not really seeing exactly what's going on for what it really is. In other words, there's the occurring world, there's how we experience it, and in the middle is our paradigms and how we make sense of what's happening. And oftentimes these two do not meet up.
So that's interesting. Number one, that you knew just instinctively and from your experience that this guy went back to his office and stewed about it. And I was thinking as you were talking about that, how often does that happen on our teams where we work when something goes wrong and we're really proud that we handled it really good in front of that person? We're like, "Oh, Becky, that's fine." But then it derails our day. So as you were saying that, I thought, God, that is so common. So number one, why is it so common? And then number two, what can we do to keep ourselves from like going click into that mode of, "God dang it, I'm and spending your whole day griping"?
Yeah. Well, it's common because many of us over time have been taught or we've learned that controlling our emotions, suppressing our emotions in those situations is the right thing to do. And it's not that that's bad. It's just that it doesn't set you up to be present in the moment. Right? You are constantly stewing over what happened before and how you could have handled it differently or what you could have said differently, rather than just getting that complete in the moment. And this goes back to how our brains operate. I mean, it's like this. When I was skiing in Lake Tahoe one time when I was in high school, I was staying in one hotel, and this girl from high school that I liked was staying in another hotel. So late at night, I was walking down this road in the middle of Lake Tahoe, and it was pitch black, and there was woods all over the place. Well, this was right about the time when Bigfoot and Sasquatch were like a big thing on TV, right? And in my mind, I knew that Sasquatch was right out there and he was going to come get me. In reality, I knew that there's no such thing as Sasquatch. Our brains cannot distinguish between what we imagine and what's real. If you think there's a bear in the woods, you're going to feel your pulse increase, your thinking's going to change, everything's going to change about you, even though there's no bear. So like in the situation with that executive, at some level, he felt attacked or he felt disrespected or he felt slighted that his team didn't do things the right way. And so he was ready for that fight or flight mechanism. What do? Well, we begin to understand, first of all, recognize that we are emotional beings and we do respond to most situations emotionally. And then there's work that we can do around what I call the response chain. And in essence, in short, what that is that when we have a key moment, and that key moment is a situation that demands a response or is emotionally triggering, we begin to understand our core beliefs about why we respond to something that way. And if you don't mind, I'll share a quick personal story about this.
Sure, go ahead.
Which will summarize it. So, I'm the youngest of 3 children, and growing up, when I was born, I was told often that I was found in the trash can, right? And even though at one level I knew it wasn't true, at another level it was sinking in a little bit. Well, fast forward. So I'm seeing somebody who I would, we're in a relationship, and I would text this woman, say hi during the day, and no response, right? Nothing until later on in the day. Well, my imagination started taking over, right? And I would think to myself, oh, she doesn't want me anymore. She doesn't like me, whatever is going on, right? And so then finally she would respond and say, hey, how you doing? And I would respond with a simple K, right? Like, okay. Well, the emotional intelligence part of this was that my core belief, that lack of response, that lack of respect, or whatever you want to call it, that I was experiencing it and giving it meaning that she doesn't want me anymore, or I'm not worthy. And that made me sad and a lot of different things. When I finally realized that it has nothing to do with it, right? Because she happens to be a school teacher, right? And is not sitting on her phone all day, right? And when I realized this, it was like this epiphany. It was another evolution in my growth and self-mastery, that I was responding to that situation as if I wasn't wanted. Now, that's a personal story. How does that show up on the playing field in business? Well, imagine that you send a proposal to a client for something, they don't get back to you for a couple of days. Is your imagination spinning out of control, right? Or if you ask somebody, if you're managing somebody and they don't do what you ask them to do, right? What story are you spinning around that? And once we can get in touch with what that story is, then we can begin to turn the volume down so it doesn't have the same impact on us anymore.
So how common is it that something like from our childhood with our brothers and sisters maybe, fibbing us to believe that we weren't wanted, or we weren't, an equal part of the family? How many of those things weave their way back into our adult life and into the workplace? Is that like a common thing that people don't even know? They have these like subtle layers of not feeling worthy, not feeling respected, not feeling wanted, and then they react on that when their boss says something to them.
So that's my personal story, right? Everybody has their own situation, but yes, I'm not a psychologist, but throughout our early development years, we make certain decisions about who we are and how safe is the world. And then over time, they become background noise, kind of like music on an elevator. And until we distinguish those, it is impossible. I don't want to say impossible, but until we distinguish those, it makes it challenging to improve our emotional intelligence, because they trigger us. They cause that response. So we don't have to go back and identify those things in order to be successful. In fact, we don't. That's not part of what I do as a coach and a consultant. But what we do is understand the 4 different paradigms in how we respond to situations. And depending on those paradigms, it's going to set up that response chain that I mentioned earlier. And the end part of that response chain is either we respond to a situation out of survival or self-mastery. Survival is when we blame other people, we assume no responsibility, we don't look to grow from the situation, we're probably living in the past at some level, and that sets up more key moments in the future. Self-mastery is the process of identifying this, learning from it, and growing from it. That's the whole process of improving your self-mastery.
So you mentioned there's 4 different paradigms as to how we respond in situations. What are the 4 paradigms? How do we respond in situations?
Sure. So the first paradigm is fear. And I would assert that fear is kind of our natural way of being. And when we experience something through fear, it's when we are not assuming responsibility for it. We're blaming other people. We're being reactive versus responding to the key moments of our lives. The next one is called duty. And duty is, we're people that kind of conform. We follow the rules. We like that process. We seek safety through conformity. And when a key moment happens that disrupts that, it can cause an emotional response. Going the next one up is called achievement. You and I probably experience a lot of life through achievement. We are successful. We want to be good. We want to look good in front of other people. And it's great until something happens that disrupts that. The final paradigm, which is one that we have to choose to be in, is called integrity. And in integrity, we're assuming responsibility for things. We're responding to situations versus reacting to situations. We typically see multiple ways to solve a situation or a problem or respond to a situation. An example of that is, let's just say you're driving down the street one day, Tom, and you're going through a green light and somebody runs the red light and T-bones you. And people in my class always bring that up as an example of how was I responsible for that? Well, clearly you were not responsible for the guy running the red light. What you are responsible for, or what you can manage, is how you respond to that situation.
Interesting. So the other thing you talk about is this idea of psychological safety. So I have no idea what that even means, and why is this something we should be talking about in our careers and in our companies?
Well, psychological safety is exploding right now, mostly due to the recent COVID pandemic, and where businesses are really focused on the emotional well-being of their employees and team members. But the nutshell definition of psychological safety is that every member of a team feels comfortable to speak up, admit mistakes without fear of retribution or anything bad. So that is the world of psychological safety. And the goal is that leads to learning and innovation. So as an example, in a high psychological safety environment, and team members will admit mistakes readily, to find correction, to take corrective action as soon as possible, and then learn and innovate new ways so that problem doesn't happen again. It is huge right now in the healthcare environment. In fact, that's where it kind of started. Dr. Amy Edmondson, she's a professor at Harvard University, and she wrote the book called The Fearless Organization. She actually, her organization certified me to be a psychological safety consultant and coach. She did a lot of studying, a lot of work inside of hospitals, try to figure out why some teams have a lot of mistakes, why other teams don't. And she found that psychological safety was really element. And the last thing I'll share with you about studies is Google, a number of years ago, did a project called Aristotle, where they surveyed 180 teams to find out what makes a great team, a high-performance team. And they determined that psychological safety is the number one reason why a team is successful or not.
So let's go a little deeper into this idea of psychological safety. So we've got a lot of people listening who are, mid-level in their careers. They're trying to figure out how to navigate the next decade and grow their careers, get more opportunities inside the companies they're in, or to move on. We have a lot of people listen who are managers of these people in these types of teams. So where does this psychological safety piece, is this something we have to take ownership of ourselves, or is this something that our boss has to bring down to everybody?
It is always more effective if it comes from the top down, in that leaders and VPs and directors are attuned to psychological safety. But where the action meets the road, or the rubber meets the road, is on the team level. It's on a manager level or a director level who's working with a team of people. And there isn't necessarily like certain things or a process that one should follow. The idea behind it is that we want people to speak up. In a brainstorming situation where we're trying to innovate something, the newest person on the team or the lowest member of the team, they may have a great idea, but they're afraid to share that idea because they're afraid that they will be teased or mocked. Or when somebody makes a mistake on the team, if I were a manager of a team, I'd want to know as soon as possible that a mistake was made. I don't want people to sweep it under the carpet, because that can lead to a whole nother set of ramifications and mistakes that are made down the road. So as a manager, it's not easy to do this, but it's also not horribly difficult to create that environment where people feel comfortable to speak up and share ideas, or to even challenge your idea that you may have as a manager.
All right, Robert, you have worked with hundreds of teams and thousands of individuals. What advice do you have as we wrap up this interview for the people listening who are looking for, how do I manage my career and how do I excel? How do I thrive? Taking the big picture look from everything you know, what do you wish everybody knew to be able to thrive more?
Well, I'll share a study from Harvard University that found that if when they surveyed people who have equal technical competency, the person with a higher degree of emotional intelligence moved up faster and made more money in the organization. Even in a situation where the person with a higher degree of emotional intelligence had lesser technical competency, that person moved up faster in organizations. So I would love to see everyone develop their emotional intelligence because they can be more successful at work, but also the ramifications out in the real world or outside the business world is also very profound, and how we manage and interact with other people.
So outside of working with you or someone like you who comes in and does training and coaching, are there resources out there that people can access online, that people can find, their books, or are there websites where people can learn about this emotional intelligence, how to master it, since the proof is in the pudding that if you master it, you do better? Where can people go to really understand this more than they can get in a 25-minute podcast interview?
Well, I'm gonna do a little self-promotion here because I have a lot of free webinars that I've recorded and host on my website that everybody can watch. You don't even have to sign up for anything. You can just search my blog and look for the workshops on emotional intelligence and self-mastery. Short of that, if you do a Google search in this, you're going to come up with thousands of resources. There are also books on the topic as well. I don't really have a specific book to recommend because many of the books are very technical, and they don't really have practical ideas or ways to improve your emotional intelligence. But if you really want to look back, Daniel Goleman, he wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, and he really is the granddaddy of emotional intelligence. It's kind of a complicated book, a little more technical, but if you really want to do a deep dive, that's a great place to start.
Technical doesn't scare the audience of this show. They live deep.
That's true.
They are waist deep in technology and technical terms and everything every single day. So, Robert, if someone does want to peruse your website for all those free webinars and blogs, what's your website? How do they find it?
You just go to blackdiamondleadership.com and you'll see a menu item for blog. And go ahead and click on that, scroll through it. There are articles on emotional intelligence with practical tips. There's webinars that I've recorded and also videos that I've done that are free to everybody.
Awesome. Well, Robert, thank you for being with us today here at the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, and thanks to everybody who tuned in and listened. Do me a favor, join us every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and actionable information around a career in product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.